stepped off the diplomatic transport ship, his boots hitting the polished crystal floor of the royal palace. The air felt different here, thicker, with a metallic taste that reminded him of pennies. Around him, tall blue-skinned aliens with elegant features bowed deeply as he passed. Their silver robes rustled like wind through leaves. He wasn't supposed to be here. 3 days ago, he had been fixing water pumps in the slums of New Detroit. Now he was humanity's only representative at the most important peace talks in galactic history. The original diplomat had fallen sick with Martian flu. The backup got arrested for starting a bar fight on Europa. That left a mechanical engineer who happened to speak 17 languages, including the impossible clicking sounds of. "This way, honored human," whispered his guide, a nervous young alien whose name sounded like wind chimes. "Princess awaits in the crystal chamber." Followed through corridors that seemed to be carved from single pieces of emerald. Everywhere he looked, holographic displays showed news feeds from across the galaxy. Most showed human ships. The ticker at the bottom read, "Human fleet positions unknown ZPHYRIAN military on high alert." The guide stopped at massive doors that reached toward a ceiling lost in shadows. "The princess has never met a human before," he whispered. "Our people, we have heard stories." Almost laughed. Stories. Like the one about Captain holding off an entire invasion fleet with just 3 ships, or Admiral Park, who reportedly stared down a black hole to save a colony. Humans had only been in space for 200 years, but they'd already become legends. The doors opened without sound. The crystal chamber was exactly that, a room carved from one enormous crystal that caught and split light into dancing rainbows. At the center, on a throne that looked like frozen starlight, sat Princess. Had seen pictures, but they hadn't prepared him. She was tall even by standards, with skin the color of a deep ocean and hair that moved like liquid silver. Her dress seemed to be made of the same material as the chamber itself. But it was her eyes that caught his attention, large, golden, and completely alien. Those eyes widened when she saw him. Was used to this reaction. Humans were shorter than most galactic species, stockier, with strange round eyes and that weird ability to show emotion through facial expressions. Most aliens found them unsettling. But Princess' reaction was different. Her breath caught. Her hands, decorated with rings that held tiny stars, trembled against the armrests of her throne. For a moment that stretched like an eternity, she simply stared. "Your Majesty," said in perfect, adding the traditional hand gesture of respect. "I am speaking for humanity." The princess tried to respond. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She seemed frozen, like someone had cast a spell on her. Around the chamber, her advisors shifted nervously. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Finally, her oldest advisor, an ancient with scars across his blue face, stepped forward. "Forgive the princess," he said carefully. "She is overwhelmed by your presence." Frowned. This wasn't going well. The peace talks were supposed to prevent a war between humanity and the Empire. 3 human colonies sat right on the border between their territories. Both sides had been moving ships into position for months. "Perhaps we should begin with the territorial agreements," suggested gently. Princess suddenly stood. The movement was so quick that her guards reached for their weapons before stopping themselves. She took a step toward, then another, like someone walking through deep water. "You're real," she whispered. Her voice was like music, but there was something else in it. Wonder, fear, something couldn't identify. "Yes, Your Majesty, I'm real." She took another step closer. Now could see that her golden eyes weren't just looking at him. They were studying him like he was the most fascinating thing in the universe. "The stories," she said quietly. "They said humans were different, that you could do impossible things, that your very presence could change the course of history." Felt a chill run down his spine. What stories had reached this far corner of the galaxy? What had humans done to earn such a reputation? "I'm just an engineer, Your Majesty. I fix things." Princess stopped breathing entirely. The words, "I fix things," hung in the air like a confession. Princess' legs gave out. She would have fallen if her guards hadn't rushed forward to catch her. They helped her back to the throne, but her golden eyes never left face. "You fix things," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Looked around the chamber, confused by the reaction. The advisors were backing away from him like he'd just announced he had the plague. The guards' hands were hovering over their weapons, but they seemed more afraid than threatening. Yes, said slowly. I'm a mechanical engineer, water systems, power grids, life support, basic infrastructure. The oldest advisor made a sound like a dying animal. Honored princess, he said urgently, perhaps we should postpone these talks. The human's presence seems to be affecting you. Princess held up a shaking hand. No, we continue. She forced herself to sit straight but could see the effort it took. Tell me who fixes things. What do you know of the prophecy of the broken chain? Shook his head. Nothing should I. A laugh escaped the princess high and sharp like breaking glass. Of course you don't know. Your species stumbles through the galaxy changing everything without even trying. She gestured to a wall where crystal formations showed moving images. The images shifted, showing ancient texts written in their flowing script. 500 years ago, the princess said, her voice gaining strength, our greatest prophet had a vision. She spoke of a species that would come from the third spiral arm of the galaxy, a people who looked like children but fought like demons. She said they would break the chains that bind the stars. The images changed, showing star maps with lines of force connecting different systems. Recognized it as a representation of the galactic trade routes and alliance structures that kept the major powers in balance. The prophet said this species would have a gift that no other possessed. They would be able to fix what was broken. Not just machines or buildings, but broken systems, broken societies, broken empires. Felt his mouth go dry. That's just a coincidence. Is it? Princess stood again, but this time her movements were controlled. She walked to another wall where more images appeared. These showed recent galactic history. The Empire had enslaved 17 species for 1,000 years. 3 human ships arrived in their space by accident. Within a year, the slaves were free and they were begging for peace treaties. The image changed. The Silicon Lords had locked themselves in their crystal cities for centuries, refusing all contact with organic life. A human trader got stranded on their world for a week. Now they have embassies on 30 planets. Another change. The hive mind of Sector 7 had consumed everything in its path for. A human scientific expedition made first contact 3 years ago. The hive mind voluntarily limited its expansion and started sharing its medical knowledge. Watched the parade of images, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. Those were just diplomatic solutions, people talking to each other. No, Princess said firmly. Those were miracles. Do you know what makes your species unique in this galaxy? Waited. Every other species that achieved space flight did so by perfecting what they already were. They mastered our natural psychic abilities. They enhanced their warrior culture. The Silicon Lords transcended physical limitations. She walked closer to again, but this time she seemed in control of herself. But humans didn't perfect anything. You took your flaws, your chaos, your inability to agree on anything, and you made it into a strength. You brought unpredictability to a galaxy that had become too predictable. The princess was now close enough that could see the tiny silver flecks in her golden eyes. You see problems where we see natural order. You ask, why, about things we accept without question. You fix things we didn't even know were broken. Your Majesty, said carefully, I'm flattered, but I really am just an engineer. I came here to negotiate territorial boundaries. Princess smiled for the first time since he'd entered the chamber. The expression transformed her face completely, making her look younger and somehow more alien at the same time. Who fixes things? She said. What if I told you that our territorial dispute isn't about territory at all? Before could answer, an alarm began blaring throughout the palace. The crystal walls flashed red, and the images changed to show long-range sensors. Princess, the oldest advisor's voice was urgent. The Void Hunters, they've broken through the outer rim. Princess went pale. How many ships? 1,000, maybe more. They're moving toward the core systems. Didn't know what Void Hunters were, but the terror on every face told him everything he needed to know. Your Majesty, he said quietly, it sounds like you have bigger problems than territorial boundaries. Princess turned to look at him and saw something in her eyes that made his breath catch. It wasn't fear or wonder anymore. It was hope. The war room beneath the palace buzzed with desperate activity. Holographic displays showed the Void Hunter fleet advancing through space like a swarm of angry wasps. Each ship was black as empty space, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. stood beside Princess as she coordinated the defense. Her earlier paralysis was completely gone, replaced by the sharp efficiency of a trained military commander. But every few minutes her eyes would flick toward him, as if checking to make sure he was still there. "Status report," the princess demanded. "The Outer Rim colonies have gone silent," reported a young officer. "No distress signals, no evacuation requests, nothing." Felt a chill, they were absorbed. The oldest advisor, who had introduced himself as General, nodded grimly. "That's how the Void Hunters work. They don't destroy or conquer. They absorb entire civilizations, adding their knowledge and technology to their collective." "How many people lived on those colonies?" asked. 40 million, Princess said quietly. The number hit like a physical blow. 40 million people just gone, turned into something else. "What about your military?" he asked. "How many ships can you field?" General's expression grew darker. "Our main fleet was destroyed 6 months ago trying to stop a smaller Void Hunter incursion. We have perhaps 200 ships left, scattered across our territory." Did quick math in his head. 200 ships against 1,000. It wasn't even close to fair odds. "What about allies, other species?" "The Empire is 3 weeks away at best speed," Princess said. "The Silicon Lords are considering our request for aid, but their decision-making process takes months." "The hive mind of Sector 7 has offered to help," General added, "but they're still weak from their recent civil war." Studied the tactical displays, his engineering mind automatically analyzing the problem. The Void Hunters were moving in a perfect formation, their ships coordinating like parts of a single machine. Their route would take them through 3 major population centers before reaching the capital world. "You need to evacuate those population centers," he said. "We've tried," Princess replied, "but the Void Hunters move faster than our evacuation ships. They'd catch our people in open space, completely defenseless." Frowned, there had to be a solution. There was always a solution, even if it wasn't obvious. "What exactly makes the Void Hunters so dangerous?" he asked. "I mean, what gives them their tactical advantage?" General activated a new display showing detailed scans of Void Hunter ships. "Perfect coordination," he said. "They share a collective consciousness, so they never make mistakes in communication or timing, and they adapt instantly to any new strategy we try. Like a hive mind. More advanced than any hive mind we've encountered. Plus, they have technology absorbed from hundreds of conquered species. Weapons we don't understand, defenses we can't penetrate." Studied the ship configurations, nodding patterns in their movement. Something was nagging at him, a half-formed idea that he couldn't quite grasp. "Princess," he said slowly, "you said humans are unpredictable, that we bring chaos to ordered systems." She nodded. "It's your greatest strength." "Then maybe that's the answer," turned to face the room. "What if unpredictability itself could be a weapon?" General made a dismissive gesture. "We've tried random tactics. The Void Hunters adapt to chaos as easily as order." "Not random tactics," said his mind racing. "Something they can't adapt to because there's nothing to adapt to." He moved to the central display and began manipulating the holographic controls. "Look, they're moving in perfect formation because they share information instantly. But what if we gave them information that didn't make sense?" Princess leaned forward, interested. "Explain." "In human history, we have stories of warriors who won battles by doing the exact opposite of what made sense. Charging when they should retreat, retreating when they should charge. Not random moves, but deliberately wrong moves that created opportunities." Highlighted sections of the Void Hunter formation. "Their strength is also their weakness. They think as one mind, which means they have one mind's limitations." "What are you suggesting?" General asked. Took a deep breath. "I'm suggesting we break every rule of space combat, make moves that are so tactically insane that their collective consciousness can't process them." The room fell silent. "That's suicide," General said finally. "Maybe," admitted, "but it's better than waiting to be absorbed." Princess was studying the displays with intense concentration. "It could work," she said slowly. "The Void Hunters have conquered so many species by learning their tactics and improving on them, but they've never faced anyone crazy enough to use deliberately bad tactics." "Exactly. We turn human unpredictability into a strategic doctrine." There's just one problem, Princess said. You keep saying we. You're a diplomatic envoy, not a military commander. Met her golden eyes. Your Majesty, I told you I was an engineer. I fix broken systems. Right now, your entire civilization is a broken system that needs fixing. The princess stared at him for a long moment. Around the room, officers watched the exchange with growing amazement. You're offering to take command of our fleet, she asked. I'm offering to show you how humans fight when everything seems hopeless. Princess was quiet for several heartbeats. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but could hear the emotion underneath. General, send word to all surviving fleet commanders. They are to follow the tactical orders of without question. Princess, General protested. He's not even military trained. No, she said, still looking at. But he's human, and right now that might be exactly what we need. The makeshift command center aboard the flagship Crystal Dawn hummed with nervous energy. Stood before the main display, surrounded by alien officers who looked at him with mixtures of hope and terror. 2 hours until the Void Hunters reached the first population center. Fleet status, asked. Captain, the ship's commander, consulted her displays. 173 ships ready for battle, mix of cruisers, destroyers, and fighters. All commanders are concerned about the battle plan. Almost smiled. Concerned was probably a polite way to say convinced we're all going to die. The battle plan he'd outlined went against every principle of space combat. Instead of concentrating their forces, they would scatter them. Instead of maintaining communication, they would observe radio silence. Instead of coordinating attacks, each ship would act independently with orders that seemed designed to get them killed. Princess, he said into his communication device, are you certain about this? Princess's voice came back from the palace, steady despite the circumstances. In the past 6 hours, you've shown me tactical possibilities our best strategists never considered. I trust you. Felt the weight of that trust. 173 ships, millions of lives depending on an untested theory. All ships, this is, he spoke into the fleet-wide communication channel. I know the orders seem insane, but remember, we're not trying to win a conventional battle. We're trying to break their ability to understand what we're doing. He switched to the tactical display. The Void Hunter fleet appeared as a dark mass of coordinated death, moving with mechanical precision toward the first population center. Begin Operation Chaos Theory, ordered. What happened next would have made any military academy instructor weep. The fleet scattered in every direction like startled fish. Ships broke formation without apparent reason. Some accelerated toward the enemy at full speed while others turned and fled. 3 destroyers began spinning end over end while firing randomly. A group of fighters started chasing their own tails in elaborate spiral patterns. On the main screen, watched the Void Hunter reaction. For the first time in recorded history, the enemy fleet hesitated. Their perfect formation wavered as they tried to process what they were seeing. Phase 2 announced. Now the real insanity began. Ships started ramming each other, but not really. At the last second, they would veer away, their hulls missing by centimeters. Others were flying backward while shooting forward. One cruiser was firing its weapons at empty space while broadcasting children's songs on all frequencies. The Void Hunter fleet came to a complete stop. Held his breath. This was the critical moment. Either the enemy would dismiss the chaos and continue their advance, or... Sir, Captain said urgently, the Void Hunter formation is breaking apart. On the display, could see confusion spreading through the enemy fleet like a virus. Ships were turning toward each other, their perfect coordination collapsing as their collective consciousness tried to analyze tactics that made no sense. Phase 3 ordered. This was the real attack. While the Void Hunters were paralyzed by confusion, the ships suddenly stopped their chaotic behavior and struck with devastating precision. But they didn't target the enemy ships, they targeted the spaces between them. Had realized something the Void Hunters' previous enemies hadn't. Their ships needed to maintain a specific distance from each other to share information effectively. By forcing them to break formation, he disrupted their communication network. The results were immediate and devastating. Void Hunter ships began firing on each other, their shared consciousness fragmenting into competing subminds. Some tried to retreat while others pressed forward. Their technological superiority meant nothing when they couldn't coordinate their efforts. Princess reported, "First population center is safe. The Void Hunters are in full retreat." But even as he spoke, he knew the victory was temporary. The enemy would learn from this encounter. They would adapt their tactics and their communication methods. Next time, chaos wouldn't work. Princess' voice carried a note he couldn't identify. "The other Void Hunter fleets, they've changed course. They're all heading toward our position." Felt his stomach drop. How many? 3,000 ships. They're converging on the capital system. The command center fell silent. Everyone understood what this meant. By defeating one fleet, they had attracted the attention of every Void Hunter force in the galaxy. Instead of absorbing the Empire piece by piece, the enemy would now try to crush them all at once. "Sir," Captain said quietly, "what are your orders?" Stared at the display showing the approaching enemy armada. 3,000 ships against less than 200. There was no tactic, no strategy, no amount of human unpredictability that could overcome those odds. "Unless, get me a direct line to the leaders of every major power in the galaxy," said suddenly. "Sir." The Emperor, the Silicon Lord High Council, the hive mind central consciousness, everyone. "Tell them I need to speak with them immediately." "What are you going to tell them?" Princess asked. Looked at the approaching storm of enemy ships, and made a decision that would either save the galaxy or doom it. "I'm going to ask them to trust a human with their entire military forces." The silence that followed was deafening. Princess said slowly, "You're talking about uniting species that have been enemies for centuries. Some of them have never even spoken to each other." "I know," said, "but here's the thing about humans, Princess. When everything looks hopeless, when all the rational options are exhausted, we get really good at finding irrational solutions that somehow work." He turned to face the assembled officers. "And right now, the most irrational solution I can think of is getting the entire galaxy to work together against a common enemy." "That's impossible." General's voice came over the communication system. Smiled grimly. "Princess, what was the first thing you said about humans? We do impossible things." On the display, the Void Hunter armada grew larger with each passing second. But for the first time since the crisis began, felt genuinely hopeful. Time to show the galaxy what humans did best, taking a hopeless situation and making it even crazier until it somehow became winnable. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had never seen anything like it. Representatives from 12 major civilizations appeared as holograms around the circular chamber aboard the flagship Crystal Dawn. Some hadn't spoken to each other in centuries. Stood in the center, acutely aware that he was the only human in a room full of beings who could vaporize his entire species without effort. "You have 15 minutes before the Void Hunters arrive," announced Emperor, his massive reptilian form bristling with barely contained aggression. "Explain why we should risk our fleets for the Empire." "Because they're not coming for just the," said simply. "Look at the tactical displays." The holograms shifted to show long-range scans of Void Hunter movements throughout the galaxy. What they revealed was terrifying. Hundreds of smaller fleets were moving toward every major population center simultaneously. "They've been planning this for decades," continued. "The attack on the was just the beginning. Once they absorb this fleet and its knowledge, they'll have the resources to strike everywhere at once." The Silicon Lord representative, a crystalline being whose voice sounded like wind chimes, spoke next. "Even if this is true, combining our fleets is logistically impossible. Our ships operate on incompatible systems. Our weapons targeting would interfere with each other," added the hive mind's voice, emanating from a floating cluster of biomechanical components. Nodded. "You're absolutely right. A conventional combined fleet would be a disaster." "Then what are you proposing?" asked Princess, her image appearing among the other leaders. Activated the tactical display showing his battle plan. The assembled leaders stared in stunned silence. "You want us to attack each other?" Emperor said flatly. "Not really attack," clarified. "Stage the most convincing fake battle in galactic history. Make the Void Hunters think you're all fighting each other while they approach." The plan was insane even by human standards. Each species would maintain their normal fleet formations and tactics, but they would coordinate their movements to create the appearance of a massive civil war erupting just as the Void Hunters arrived. "The enemy expects resistance," explained. They don't expect to find their target in the middle of chaos they didn't create. "This is madness," declared the Aquatic Collective's representative, her blue form rippling with agitation. "You want us to pretend to destroy each other. I want you to confuse an enemy that has never encountered large-scale deception," said. "The Void Hunters absorb species by learning their tactics, but they've never absorbed a species that lies." The room erupted in multiple alien languages as the representatives argued among themselves. Caught fragments, protests about honor, concerns about trust, debates over tactics that made no sense. "Enough," Princess' voice cut through the chaos. "We have 8 minutes before they arrive. Vote now, trust the humans' plan, or face the Void Hunters alone." The votes came in rapidly. The Empire, yes. The Silicon Lords, yes. The Hive Mind, yes. One by one, 12 civilizations agreed to the most ridiculous battle plan in galactic history. "All fleets begin Operation Looking Glass," announced. What followed was the most beautiful fake war had ever seen. The fleet charged toward the Silicon Lord ships with apparent bloodthirsty fury, only to veer aside at the last moment while firing harmless light shows. The Aquatic Collective's bioships engaged in elaborate combat dances with the crystalline hegemony's geometric vessels, their weapons carefully missing by precisely calculated margins. In the middle of it all, the fleet appeared to be fighting desperately against overwhelming odds, broadcasting panic distress signals on all frequencies. The Void Hunter Armada arrived to find chaos beyond their ability to comprehend. Instead of a coordinated defense, they saw 12 species apparently destroying each other in a free-for-all battle. "They're taking the bait," reported Captain. "The Void Hunters are holding position, analyzing the situation." Watch the enemy formation on the tactical display. They had stopped their advance and were spreading out, trying to understand what they were seeing. "Phase 2 announced, make it personal." Now the fake battle became a soap opera. Ships began broadcasting elaborate insults in their native languages. They accused the Silicon Lords of breaking ancient treaties. The Hive Mind declared war on everyone for disturbing their meditation. The Aquatic Collective started crying about pollution in their sacred spawning grounds. The Void Hunters' collective consciousness was grinding to a halt, trying to process the emotional chaos of 12 species having nervous breakdowns simultaneously. Phase 3 said, the reveal. Every ship in the Allied fleet suddenly stopped fighting and turned toward the Void Hunters in perfect unison. The psychological impact was devastating. For a collective consciousness that prided itself on perfect coordination, seeing 12 incompatible species achieve flawless unity was like watching mathematics break down. But the real surprise came next. "This is Admiral Sarah of the Human Expeditionary Force," announced a new voice over all communication channels. "Sorry we're late to the party." Felt his heart leap as human ships materialized out of hyperspace behind the Void Hunter fleet. Not the 3 or 4 ships he'd expected, but hundreds of them. Sarah said in amazement, "How did you get here so fast?" "We've been tracking Void Hunter movements for months," Admiral replied. "When we detected the massive fleet convergence, we figured someone was either throwing the galaxy's biggest party or needed serious help." The Void Hunter fleet was now trapped between the combined Galactic Alliance and the Human Expeditionary Force. But more importantly, they were psychologically paralyzed by encountering something their collective consciousness couldn't process: genuine cooperation between incompatible species. "All ships," announced, "show them what unity really looks like." The battle that followed wasn't really a battle. It was a demonstration. 12 different species, plus humans, fighting with perfect coordination while maintaining their unique characteristics. Ships charged with typical berserker fury, but their timing was flawless. Silicon Lords struck with mathematical precision exactly when needed. The Hive Mind's bioships supported everyone with tactical perfection. The Void Hunters, masters of absorption and adaptation, found themselves facing something they couldn't absorb: the chaotic harmony of truly diverse cooperation. "They're retreating," Captain announced in amazement. "No," corrected, watching the enemy fleet's movements. "They're evolving." The Void Hunter ships were changing, their formation becoming less rigid, their movements less predictable. The collective consciousness was learning from what they'd witnessed. "They're trying to become more like us," Princess observed. Smiled, "Then they've already lost." 3 hours later, the crisis was over. The Void Hunter fleet had withdrawn to the galaxy's edge, their collective consciousness apparently rebooting itself to process the concept of cooperative individuality. Stood on the observation deck of the Crystal Dawn, watching the Allied fleets beginning to disperse. Each species was already planning trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and joint research projects. The fake war had created real friendships. "You did it," Princess said, joining him at the viewport. "You united the galaxy." "Temporarily," corrected. "Give it 6 months and they'll be arguing about trade routes again." "But they'll remember this day. They'll remember that cooperation is possible." Nodded, then looked at the princess. Throughout the crisis, he'd noticed something changing in her golden eyes. The paralysis and wonder had been replaced by something else entirely. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "I should probably head back to Earth soon. My leave of absence is almost up." Princess was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady but soft. The prophecy mentioned something else about the species that would break the chains binding the stars. "What's that?" She turned to face him fully. "It said they would also forge new chains, connections between worlds that had never existed before." Felt his breath catch as he met her golden eyes. "Who fixes things?" she said quietly. "What if I told you that the Empire has need of a permanent human ambassador, someone who understands both diplomacy and engineering?" Looked out at the stars, then back at the alien princess who had somehow become the most important person in his universe. "I'd say that sounds like exactly the kind of impossible job a human would be crazy enough to take." Princess smiled, that transformative expression that made her seem both more and less alien at the same time. "Good," she said, "because I think we have a lot more things that need fixing." As the Allied fleets jumped to hyperspace around them, realized that his real mission was just beginning. He had come to prevent a war and ended up starting a revolution. Just another day in the life of a human who fixed things. Stepped off the diplomatic transport ship, his boots hitting the polished crystal floor of the royal palace. The air felt different here, thicker, with a metallic taste that reminded him of pennies. Around him, tall blue-skinned aliens with elegant features bowed deeply as he passed. Their silver robes rustled like wind through leaves. He wasn't supposed to be here. 3 days ago, he had been fixing water pumps in the slums of New Detroit. Now he was humanity's only representative at the most important peace talks in galactic history. The original diplomat had fallen sick with Martian flu. The backup got arrested for starting a bar fight on Europa. That left a mechanical engineer who happened to speak 17 languages, including the impossible clicking sounds of. "This way, honored human," whispered his guide, a nervous young alien whose name sounded like wind chimes. "Princess awaits in the crystal chamber." Followed through corridors that seemed to be carved from single pieces of emerald. Everywhere he looked, holographic displays showed news feeds from across the galaxy. Most showed human ships. The ticker at the bottom read, "Human fleet positions unknown ZPHYRIAN military on high alert." The guide stopped at massive doors that reached toward a ceiling lost in shadows. "The princess has never met a human before," he whispered. "Our people, we have heard stories." Almost laughed. Stories. Like the one about Captain holding off an entire invasion fleet with just 3 ships, or Admiral Park who reportedly stared down a black hole to save a colony. Humans had only been in space for 200 years, but they'd already become legends. The doors opened without sound. The crystal chamber was exactly that, a room carved from one enormous crystal that caught and split light into dancing rainbows. At the center, on a throne that looked like frozen starlight, sat Princess. Had seen pictures, but they hadn't prepared him. She was tall even by standards, with skin the color of a deep ocean and hair that moved like liquid silver. Her dress seemed to be made of the same material as the chamber itself. But it was her eyes that caught his attention, large, golden, and completely alien. Those eyes widened when she saw him. Was used to this reaction. Humans were shorter than most galactic species, stockier, with strange round eyes and that weird ability to show emotion through facial expressions. Most aliens found them unsettling. But Princess' reaction was different. Her breath caught. Her hands, decorated with rings that held tiny stars, trembled against the armrests of her throne. For a moment that stretched like an eternity, she simply stared. Your Majesty, said in perfect, adding the traditional hand gesture of respect. I am speaking for humanity. The princess tried to respond. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She seemed frozen, like someone had cast a spell on her. Around the chamber, her advisors shifted nervously. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Finally, her oldest advisor, an ancient with scars across his blue face, stepped forward. Forgive the princess, he said carefully. She is overwhelmed by your presence. Frowned, this wasn't going well. The peace talks were supposed to prevent a war between humanity and the Empire. 3 human colonies sat right on the border between their territories. Both sides had been moving ships into position for months. Perhaps we should begin with the territorial agreements, suggested gently. Princess suddenly stood. The movement was so quick that her guards reached for their weapons before stopping themselves. She took a step toward, then another, like someone walking through deep water. You're real, she whispered. Her voice was like music, but there was something else in it. Wonder, fear, something couldn't identify. Yes, Your Majesty, I'm real. She took another step closer. Now could see that her golden eyes weren't just looking at him. They were studying him like he was the most fascinating thing in the universe. The stories, she said quietly. They said humans were different, that you could do impossible things, that your very presence could change the course of history. Felt a chill run down his spine. What stories had reached this far corner of the galaxy? What had humans done to earn such a reputation? I'm just an engineer, Your Majesty. I fix things. Princess stopped breathing entirely. No one returned after fighting humans, Part 2. 3 months after Admiral's testimony before the Galactic Council, the political landscape of known space had shifted dramatically. The initial shock of the Third Fleet's defeat had given way to a complex web of reactions that split the galactic community along lines that had never existed before. Captain Ra of the Hegemony Intelligence Service materialized in her office aboard the Deep Space Monitoring Station Vigilant Eye. Her cybernetic implants still processing the latest intelligence reports from across the galaxy. As one of the most capable intelligence operatives in known space, she had been tasked with gathering information about humanity and assessing the true scope of the threat they represented. The data she had compiled over the past 3 months painted a picture that was both fascinating and terrifying. Her multidimensional display showed connections and patterns that suggested the human influence in galactic affairs went far deeper than anyone had initially realized. Computer, display analysis summary Delta 7, she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with classified information that could reshape civilizations. The holographic display responded immediately, showing a complex network of connections spreading across known space like a vast web. Each node represented a different species, government, or organization, and the connecting lines showed relationships that had previously been invisible to galactic intelligence services. The humans have been busy, Ra muttered to herself as she examined the data. What had initially appeared to be a single species defending there was revealing itself to be something far more complex and concerning. Her investigation had begun with the list of extinct species that Admiral had mentioned to Admiral. The makers of harmonies, the deep thinkers, the star whisperers. Each of these civilizations had been eliminated by different galactic powers over the past several centuries. But careful analysis of energy signatures and quantum resonance patterns suggested that representatives of all these species were indeed alive and active. Display timeline analysis, Ra ordered, and the hologram shifted to show a chronological breakdown of events over the past 2 centuries. The pattern that emerged was disturbing in its implications. In each case where a species had faced extinction, there had been reports of unusual spatial anomalies in the region shortly before their disappearance. Ships entering those areas had reported navigation failures, sensor malfunctions, and temporary communication blackouts. At the time, these incidents had been dismissed as natural phenomena or equipment failures. Now, with the benefit of hindsight and knowledge of human capabilities, a different picture emerged. The spatial anomalies coincided perfectly with the times when refugee populations would need to be evacuated. The navigation failures were sophisticated enough to prevent pursuit. The sensor malfunctions were precisely calibrated to hide the energy signatures of large-scale rescue operations. The humans were running an underground railroad across the galaxy, Ra realized with a mixture of admiration and concern. For 2 centuries, they've been saving species that we thought were extinct. But the implications went deeper than simple rescue operations. If humanity had been capable of such large-scale covert activities for 200 years, what did that say about their true technological capabilities? More importantly, what did it say about their intelligence networks? Ra activated her secure communication array and established contact with her network of field operatives across the galaxy. Over the next several hours, reports began flowing in that painted an increasingly complex picture of human activity. Agent, operating in the Outer Rim territories, reported unusual energy signatures near several recently established research stations. When investigated, these facilities appeared to be conducting advanced studies in quantum mechanics and dimensional manipulation, but the researchers claimed to be from species that local records showed had been extinct for decades. Commander L, monitoring trade routes in the core worlds, had documented several instances of merchant vessels with unusual cargo manifests arriving at remote stations. The cargo appeared to be exotic materials and technologies that exceeded the capabilities of any known civilization. The merchant vessels themselves used drive signatures that couldn't be matched to any existing technology database. But perhaps most concerning were the reports from Agent, who had been monitoring the aftermath of recent military conflicts throughout the galaxy. In each case, survivors from losing sides had reported being contacted by mysterious benefactors offering safe passage and sanctuary. These benefactors never identified themselves, but their ships used stealth technologies that rendered them invisible to most sensor arrays. They're not just protecting extinct species, Ra concluded as she analyzed the accumulated data. They're actively working to prevent new extinctions. The implications were staggering. If humanity was intervening in conflicts across the galaxy to protect vulnerable civilizations, they possessed not only the technology to do so undetected, but also the intelligence networks necessary to identify threats before they became critical. Ra's analysis was interrupted by an urgent communication from her supervisor, Director N of Hegemony Intelligence. The director's expression was grim as he appeared on her secure channel. "Captain, we've received reports of unusual activity in Sector 779, he began without preamble. The collective has launched a fleet to investigate reports of illegal settlements in that region. Ra felt a chill run through her cybernetic systems. Sector 779 had been on her watch list as a possible location for one of the hidden refugee populations. If the collective was sending a fleet to investigate, they might be about to trigger exactly the kind of confrontation that Admiral had warned against. "Sir, I need to brief you on my findings," Ra said urgently. "The situation with the humans is far more complex than we initially understood." Director N's expression grew even more serious as Ra quickly outlined her discoveries. The network of refugee species, the underground evacuation operations, the ongoing intervention in galactic conflicts. Each revelation added another layer to a picture that was becoming increasingly alarming. "Director, if the collective fleet encounters human forces protecting refugee populations in Sector 779, we could be looking at the next phase of humanity's introduction to galactic politics," Ra concluded. "And based on what happened to Admiral's fleet, I don't think the collective is prepared for what they're going to face." Director N was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Finally, he spoke. "Captain, I want you to take a fast courier ship and proceed to Sector 779 immediately. Your mission is to observe and report on any contact between human and collective forces. Do not engage, do not interfere, and do not reveal your presence. We need to understand how the humans will respond to a direct challenge." As Ra prepared for her mission, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to witness something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The collective was known throughout known space for their ruthless efficiency and overwhelming military force. Unlike the Empire, which still maintained some semblance of honor in warfare, the collective believed in total victory through any means necessary. If the humans were indeed protecting refugee populations in Sector 779, and if the collective was approaching with hostile intent, the stage was set for a confrontation that would test the limits of human capabilities and patience. Meanwhile, in a secure facility buried deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon, Admiral Sarah stood before a holographic display that showed the approaching collective fleet in real time. The display was fed by a network of monitoring stations that had been observing galactic military movements for decades, invisible to even the most sophisticated sensor arrays. "Admiral, the collective fleet consists of 800 vessels, including 40 planet killers," reported Commander Jackson, her chief tactical officer. "Intelligence suggests they're operating under a total warfare protocol. If they encounter any resistance, they're authorized to eliminate all life in the sector." Admiral nodded grimly. The collective's reputation was well known to human intelligence services. Unlike other galactic powers that might be reasoned with or deterred, the collective viewed any form of resistance as justification for complete annihilation. "Status of our assets in Sector 779?" she asked. "Sanctuary Station Harmony is operational with approximately 50,000 refugees from the makers of Harmonies," Commander Jackson replied. "Sanctuary Station Deep Thought houses about 30,000 refugees from the Deep Thinkers. Both stations are fully cloaked and should be undetectable to collective sensors." "And our defensive forces?" "Fleet Group 7 is standing by in dimensional storage. 120 vessels configured for deep space engagement. Fleet Group 12 is positioned for close-quarters combat if the collective attempts planetary bombardment." Admiral studied the tactical display, noting the positions of collective vessels as they approached the sector. Their formation suggested they were indeed planning to systematically scan every system for signs of unauthorized habitation. "Time to contact. 18 hours until the collective fleet enters Sector 779, Commander Jackson reported. 12 hours until they begin active scanning of systems containing our sanctuary stations." Admiral turned away from the display and walked to the observation deck that looked out over the lunar surface toward Earth. Somewhere in the blue-green glow of her, families were going about their daily lives, unaware that decisions made in the next few hours might determine humanity's relationship with the galaxy for centuries to come. The Empire had approached Earth with standard conquest in mind, and humanity had responded with a demonstration of superior technology coupled with unexpected mercy. The message had been clear. Humanity was capable of defending itself, but preferred peaceful coexistence. The collective, however, represented a different kind of threat. They didn't seek conquest or subjugation. They sought total elimination of anything that challenged their authority. There would be no negotiation, no mercy, and no peaceful resolution if they decided that the refugee populations represented a threat to their power structure. "Commander, implement Protocol Omega," Admiral ordered. "All sanctuary stations are to prepare for emergency evacuation procedures. I want every refugee population ready to be relocated within 6 hours." "Yes, Admiral, and our response to the collective fleet." Admiral was quiet for a long moment, weighing options that would affect millions of lives across multiple species. Finally, she spoke with the quiet authority that had made her one of the most respected military leaders in human history. "The collective has a choice to make," she said. "They can recognize the sovereignty of the refugee populations and withdraw peacefully, or they can face the consequences of threatening civilians under our protection." She turned back to the tactical display, her expression hardening. "But this time, Commander, we won't be showing mercy to anyone who threatens innocent lives. The refugees in Sector 779 have already suffered enough at the hands of galactic powers who consider them expendable." As Admiral issued orders that would mobilize humanity's hidden military forces across multiple sectors, Captain Ra's courier ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Sector 779. Her sensors immediately began detecting the energy signatures of the approaching collective fleet, but also something else that made her cybernetic systems freeze with shock. The entire sector was alive with activity that her ship's sensors could barely comprehend. Energy patterns that known physics flowed between points of space that appeared empty to visual inspection. Gravitational anomalies suggested the presence of massive structures that were completely invisible to her detection equipment. "What in the void of space?" Ra muttered as she tried to make sense of the sensor data. It was as if an entire civilization was operating in the sector using technologies that rendered them essentially invisible to conventional detection. But as the collective fleet drew closer, some of those energy patterns began to shift and coalesce into formations that could only be described as defensive. Whatever the humans had hidden in Sector 779, they were preparing for a fight that would make the Third Fleet's defeat look like a minor skirmish. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either establish humanity as a major galactic power, or reveal the true extent of their capabilities to a universe that was only beginning to understand what they were dealing with. No one returned after fighting humans, Part 3. The collective fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, 800 vessels arranged in a three-dimensional lattice that could bring overwhelming firepower to bear on any target within the sector. Fleet Admiral of the Collective Navy stood on the bridge of the flagship Absolute Authority, his 4 cybernetic eyes scanning holographic displays that showed every detail of their operational area. Unlike the ornate vessels favored by other galactic powers, collective ships were brutal monuments to efficiency. Every surface was armored, every angle calculated for maximum weapons placement, every system redundant and hardened against both conventional and exotic attacks. The Collective had conquered 12 star systems in the past century, and their fleet reflected that experience. "Begin deep scan protocols," Admiral ordered, his synthetic voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. "I want every asteroid, every gas cloud, every quantum fluctuation analyzed for signs of unauthorized habitation." The scan began immediately, powerful sensor arrays reaching out to examine every cubic meter of space within a light-year radius. Within minutes, the sensor operators began reporting anomalies that explanation. Admiral were detecting quantum resonance patterns that suggest the presence of large artificial structures, but visual and standard sensors show empty space, reported Senior Technician L. The energy patterns are consistent with cloaking technology, but operating on a scale we've never encountered. Admiral's expression remained unchanged. The Collective had faced cloaking technology before and had developed countermeasures for every known variant. Deploy penetration protocols, full spectrum analysis across all dimensional frequencies. The fleet's most advanced sensors began operating at maximum capacity, using techniques that could penetrate virtually any known stealth system. But instead of revealing hidden structures, the increased scanning intensity seemed to trigger something unexpected. Space itself began to change around the Collective fleet. "Admiral, we're detecting massive gravitational distortions forming around our position," reported the navigation officer, his voice carrying the first note of concern that anyone on the bridge had heard in years. "The distortions are artificial in nature and appear to be positioning us within some kind of containment field." On the main display, the tactical situation began to shift in ways that challenged everything the Collective knew about space warfare. What had appeared to be empty space moments before was now revealing itself to be filled with structures and vessels that operated according to principles that exceeded collective understanding. "Sir, we're being hailed," reported the communications officer. "The transmission is coming from multiple sources simultaneously, but they're all broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't be able to penetrate our communication shields." Admiral straightened in his command chair. "Display the transmission." The holographic display shimmered and resolved into the image of a human figure wearing what appeared to be a military uniform of unfamiliar design. But what was most unsettling about the transmission was that it appeared to be originating from directly in front of the Collective flagship, despite the fact that sensors showed nothing but empty space in that location. "I am Commander Maria Santos of the Earth Defense Forces," the human said, her voice carrying a calm authority that seemed incongruous with the tactical situation. "You are currently within the protected zone of Sector 779. Please state your business and intentions." Admiral's 4 eyes focused on the transmission with mechanical precision. "I am Fleet Admiral of the Collective Navy. This sector has been designated for cleansing operations to eliminate unauthorized settlements that violate collective territorial claims. Withdraw your vessels immediately or face annihilation." Commander Santos's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested that she found the Admiral's response both predictable and disappointing. "Admiral, the settlements in this sector are under Earth protection. They consist of refugee populations that have been granted sanctuary by the United Earth Government. We suggest you reconsider your position." The Admiral's synthetic voice carried no emotion as he responded. "The Collective recognizes no authority other than our own. You have 30 standard minutes to withdraw your forces from this sector. After that time, we will begin cleansing operations. Commander Santos nodded slowly, as if she had expected this response. Admiral, before you commit your fleet to this course of action, I want you to understand exactly what you're facing. Your sensors are currently detecting minimal human presence because 90% of our forces are operating in what you might call adjacent dimensional space. She manipulated controls that were invisible to the collective sensors, and suddenly the tactical display aboard the flagship began showing contact signatures that numbered in the thousands. Ships, stations, defensive platforms, and weapon emplacements appeared as if materializing from nothing, surrounding the collective fleet in a three-dimensional array that dwarfed anything Admiral had ever encountered. Every vessel in your fleet is currently targeted by a minimum of 50 human weapon systems, Commander Santos continued in the same calm tone. Our weapons operate by manipulating the fundamental forces of physics in ways that make conventional armor and shielding largely irrelevant. Admiral cybernetic systems process the tactical data with machine efficiency, but the conclusions his analysis reached were difficult to accept. If the sensor readings were accurate, the human forces surrounding his fleet possessed firepower that exceeded the collective's by several orders of magnitude. You are attempting to deceive us with false sensor data, the Admiral declared. No species possesses the capabilities you claim. Commander Santos smiled, and the expression was somehow more unsettling than an outright threat. Admiral, I'm going to demonstrate our capabilities using one of your own vessels. Please designate a ship that you consider expendable. I will not, Admiral began, but Commander Santos continued speaking as if he had not responded. Your destroyer Relentless Duty, grid position 77 Alpha, has been selected for demonstration. Please observe. On the main tactical display, one of the collective destroyers, a vessel armed with enough firepower to level a planet, suddenly began to change. Not explode, not disintegrate, but transform in ways that understanding. What you're seeing is the manipulation of strong nuclear force at the molecular level, Commander Santos explained as the destroyer's hull began to reshape itself. We're converting the vessel's armor into a different molecular configuration. It will retain its basic structure, but the material properties are being altered to something more manageable. Within minutes, the destroyer's hull had been transformed from military-grade metamaterials into what appeared to be a crystalline substance that gleamed like diamond in the light of the sector's primary star. The vessel was still intact, and its crew was still alive, but it was now composed of material that would shatter if exposed to anything more forceful than a mild impact. The process is reversible, Commander Santos added, but I think this demonstrates that conventional defensive measures are not particularly relevant when facing human technology. Admiral stared at the transformed destroyer, his cybernetic mind struggling to process what he had witnessed. The collective had faced enemies with advanced energy weapons, exotic matter manipulation, and even limited reality alteration capabilities. But what the humans had just demonstrated suggested mastery over the fundamental forces of physics that went far beyond anything in known science. You will release my vessel immediately, he demanded. Of course, Commander Santos replied. But first, you need to make a decision about your mission objectives. The refugee populations in this sector pose no threat to collective interests. They're simply seeking peaceful coexistence on worlds that were uninhabited when they arrived. You have the option to withdraw your fleet and report that the sector contains no unauthorized settlements. The Admiral's 4 eyes focused on the tactical display, where his transformed destroyer remained as evidence of human capabilities. And if I refuse? Then we will protect the refugees by any means necessary, Commander Santos replied, and for the first time her voice carried an edge that made it clear she was not making an empty threat. But Admiral, I want you to understand something important about humanity. We don't seek conflict, and we take no pleasure in causing harm to other species. What happened to Admiral's fleet was a demonstration designed to prevent a larger war. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. But if you force us to choose between the safety of refugee populations under our protection and the survival of a collective fleet that threatens them, we will make that choice without hesitation. Admiral's tactical systems were running constant analysis of the human fleet positions, searching for weaknesses or vulnerabilities that could be exploited. But every analysis reached the same conclusion. The collective fleet was completely surrounded, and by forces that possessed technological superiority in every measurable category. "What guarantee do we have that you will not use these capabilities against collective territories?" he asked. "The same guarantee we offered Admiral," Commander Santos replied. "Earth has no territorial ambitions in galactic space. We're content to remain in our own system and protect those who seek our assistance. But any species that threatens our allies or attempts to genocide populations under our protection will face the full extent of human defensive capabilities." On the bridge of the flagship, Senior Technician L reported additional sensor contacts that made the situation even more complex. "Admiral, we're detecting approaching vessels from multiple directions. The signatures suggest ships from the Hegemony, the Ethereal Collective, and several other major powers." The tactical display updated to show the arrival of additional fleets, each maintaining position at the edge of the sector, but clearly observing the confrontation. Admiral realized that the situation had evolved far beyond a simple military operation. This engagement was being monitored by every major power in the galaxy. "It appears that word of your mission has spread," Commander Santos observed. "I suspect that several galactic governments are very interested in seeing how this confrontation resolves. Your decision here will likely influence how other species view both the collective and humanity." Admiral's cybernetic mind processed multiple scenarios, calculating probabilities and outcomes with machine precision. Every analysis pointed to the same conclusion. The collective fleet was facing an enemy that possessed overwhelming technological superiority and the tactical positioning to utilize it effectively. But beyond the immediate military situation was a larger strategic consideration. The collective's power in galactic politics was based on the perception that their military forces were unstoppable. If word spread that an entire fleet had been neutralized by a species that most of the galaxy still considered primitive, it could undermine collective authority throughout known space. "Commander Santos," Admiral said finally, "the collective requires evidence that the populations in this sector pose no security threat to our territories." "That can be arranged," Commander Santos replied. "We're prepared to provide detailed documentation of all refugee settlements, their populations, their origins, and their current activities. You'll find that they're engaged in peaceful agriculture, research, and cultural preservation. None of them possess military capabilities or territorial ambitions." "And what prevents them from developing such capabilities in the future?" "The same thing that prevents Earth from becoming a threat to galactic stability," Commander Santos answered. "They're under our protection, which means they're also bound by our principles. We don't tolerate aggression from our allies any more than we tolerate aggression against them." Admiral considered this response while monitoring the energy readings from the human fleet. The power signatures he was detecting suggested that what he was seeing was only a fraction of humanity's actual capabilities. If the humans were indeed protecting multiple refugee populations throughout the galaxy, they possessed resources that exceeded anything the collective had imagined possible. "Very well," the Admiral said finally. "The collective will withdraw from this sector pending review of your documentation, but be aware that we will be monitoring the situation closely." "Of course," Commander Santos replied. "And Admiral, your destroyer will be restored to its original configuration within the hour. Consider it a gesture of good faith." As the collective fleet began withdrawing from Sector 779, Captain Ra watched the proceedings from her concealed observation post with a mixture of fascination and growing concern. The ease with which the humans had neutralized the most powerful fleet in known space suggested capabilities that went far beyond what anyone had imagined. But more concerning was the realization that this was clearly not the first time humanity had faced such a confrontation. Commander Santos had handled the situation with the practiced ease of someone who had dealt with similar threats many times before. This suggested that human galactic interactions had been ongoing for much longer than anyone had realized. As Ra prepared her report for Director N, she couldn't shake the feeling that the galactic community was only beginning to understand the true scope of humanity's involvement in interstellar affairs. The question now was not whether humanity possessed the capability to defend itself and its allies, but what other secrets they were hiding in the darkness between the stars. No one returned after fighting humans, Part 4. In the weeks following the collective's withdrawal from Sector 779, the galactic political landscape underwent changes that no one had anticipated. Captain Ra's detailed report had been distributed to intelligence services across known space, and the implications of human capabilities were being debated in council chambers, war rooms, and diplomatic installations throughout the galaxy. The response was not uniform. Some species viewed humanity as a potential threat that needed to be eliminated before their power grew further. Others saw an opportunity for alliance with a species that possessed technology far beyond galactic norms. A few began to question whether their previous understanding of galactic power structures had been fundamentally wrong. In the secure conference room aboard the neutral station Harmony Point, representatives from 12 major galactic powers had gathered for an unprecedented emergency session. Unlike the formal chambers of the Galactic Council, this meeting was being held in secret, with participants using diplomatic codes that would leave no official record of their discussions. Ambassador Eth of the Hegemony Intelligence Service stood before a holographic display that showed intelligence data compiled from across known space. Her expression was grim as she addressed the assembled representatives. "The situation has evolved far beyond what any of us initially understood," she began. "Our investigation into human activities has revealed a network of intervention and protection that spans centuries and affects virtually every major conflict in recent galactic history." She activated the display, showing a timeline that stretched back 300 years. What we initially believed to be recent human contact with galactic civilization appears to have been ongoing since their first development of faster-than-light travel. The evidence suggests they have been observing us, studying our conflicts, and selectively intervening to prevent what they consider genocide. Representative of the Serpentine Consortium shifted uncomfortably. The Serpentines had been responsible for several ethnic cleansing operations over the past 2 centuries, and the possibility that humanity had been monitoring those activities was deeply unsettling. "What evidence supports these claims?" asked Counselor Al of the Crystal Dominion. Ambassador Eth manipulated the display, showing energy signature analysis and gravitational anomaly data. Retrospective analysis of spatial phenomena during the Rim Wars reveals energy patterns consistent with large-scale matter transportation. The navigation hazard that prevented pursuit of surviving Harmony Makers matches exactly the dimensional distortion, effects we observed during the recent collective encounter. She continued, highlighting additional data points. The plague ships that mysteriously disappeared during the Deep Thinker crisis contained energy signatures that match human dimensional storage technology. The Phantom Fleet that was reported during the Star Whisperer evacuation used stealth capabilities identical to what we observed in Sector 779. The implications were staggering. If humanity had been conducting rescue operations during major galactic conflicts for centuries, they possessed not only the technology to do so undetected, but also intelligence networks that reached into the highest levels of galactic governments. "How extensive are their operations?" asked General N of the Militant Brotherhood. "According to our analysis, humanity has intervened in at least 47 major conflicts over the past 3 centuries, Ambassador Eth replied. "In every case, civilian populations that were facing extermination mysteriously disappeared shortly before their worlds were destroyed. We now believe these populations were evacuated and relocated to hidden sanctuary worlds." She paused, allowing the weight of this information to sink in. "We are not dealing with a primitive species that recently developed advanced technology. We are dealing with a civilization that has been studying galactic society for centuries and has developed capabilities specifically designed to counter our military and intelligence operations." Overlord of the Mineral Lords spoke for the first time during the session. "What do they want?" "That appears to be the most unsettling aspect of the entire situation," Ambassador Eth replied. "Based on their communications with Admiral and Admiral, they claim to want nothing more than peaceful coexistence and the protection of vulnerable populations. They have made no territorial demands, issued no ultimatums beyond the defense of their protected species, and have shown remarkable restraint in their use of force." She activated another section of the display, showing communication intercepts and diplomatic analysis. "Their stated position is that they wish to remain in their home system and serve as protectors for refugee populations throughout the galaxy. They have offered to share certain technologies with any species that agrees to humanitarian standards regarding treatment of minority populations. General N leaned forward. And what are these humanitarian standards? Prohibition of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and forced displacement of civilian populations, Ambassador Eth replied. Protection of cultural minorities and respect for the right of refugee populations to seek sanctuary. Basic medical care and education for all sentient beings regardless of species. The silence that followed this statement was telling. Every government represented in the room had violated at least one of these principles within living memory, and several had built their power structures on the systematic oppression of minority populations. They're attempting to impose their moral framework on galactic civilization, observed Representative. This cannot be tolerated. The question, Ambassador Eth replied, is whether we have any choice in the matter. Their demonstrated capabilities suggest that they could enforce these standards whether we agree to them or not. She activated a new section of the display, showing tactical analysis from the encounters with the Third Fleet and the collective expedition. In both cases, human forces demonstrated the ability to neutralize vastly superior numbers with minimal effort while showing remarkable precision in avoiding casualties. This suggests not only technological superiority, but also strategic planning that accounts for long-term political consequences. They could have destroyed both fleets completely, observed Counselor Al. The fact that they chose to disable rather than annihilate suggests they're more interested in demonstrating their capabilities than in winning through fear. Which makes them more dangerous, not less, General N replied. An enemy that kills your forces can be understood and countered. An enemy that defeats you while demonstrating moral superiority undermines the entire foundation of military deterrence. Ambassador Eth nodded. General N has identified the core of our strategic problem. Humanity appears to be operating according to principles that prioritize the protection of civilian populations over traditional military objectives. This makes them unpredictable in ways that our standard threat assessment models cannot account for. The meeting was interrupted by an urgent communication from the station's monitoring center. A technician's voice filled the conference room with obvious distress. Sirs, we're detecting massive energy signatures approaching this station. Multiple ships using unknown drive technologies. The holographic display shifted automatically to show the station's tactical sensors. Approaching Harmony Point were 12 vessels that appeared to be constructed from materials that bent light around their hulls. The ships moved with perfect coordination, taking positions around the station that suggested intimate knowledge of its defensive capabilities. We're being hailed, the technician reported. Ambassador Eth looked around the room at her fellow representatives, all of whom wore expressions ranging from concern to outright fear. Except the transmission. The holographic display resolved into the image of a human figure wearing the same style of uniform they had seen in previous encounters. But this individual was older, with gray hair and eyes that suggested decades of experience in dealing with complex political situations. I am Admiral James Richardson of the Earth Diplomatic Corps, the human said. I apologize for the unexpected arrival, but recent intelligence suggests that this gathering is discussing matters that directly affect Earth's interests and the welfare of populations under our protection. Ambassador Eth found her voice. Admiral, this is a private diplomatic meeting. Your presence here violates several interstellar protocols. Admiral Richardson nodded politely. I understand your concern, Ambassador Eth. However, when that private diplomatic meeting involves plans to counter what you consider the human threat, Earth believes we should be part of the discussion. The implications of this statement sent chills through every representative in the room. If the humans had detected this secret meeting and identified its participants, their intelligence capabilities exceeded anything previously imagined. More importantly, Admiral Richardson continued, I believe there are fundamental misunderstandings about Earth's position that need to be addressed before any government makes decisions that could have unfortunate consequences. General N leaned forward. What misunderstandings? The belief that Earth is seeking to impose our moral framework on galactic civilization, Admiral Richardson replied. That's not accurate. We have no interest in governing other species or interfering in their internal affairs. He paused, allowing this statement to be absorbed. What we will not tolerate is the systematic extermination of entire populations. When a government decides that genocide is an acceptable political tool, they make themselves our concern. And if we refuse to accept your standards? Representative asked. Admiral Richardson's expression remained pleasant, but something in his eyes suggested that this was not a question he enjoyed answering. Then you'll discover that Earth has been preparing for that possibility for a very long time. He manipulated controls that were not visible to the station's sensors, and suddenly the tactical display began showing energy signatures that dwarfed anything the assembled representatives had ever seen. Ships, stations, defensive installations, and weapon platforms appeared throughout the local star system in numbers that suggested a military force capable of challenging the combined fleets of all major galactic powers. What you're seeing is approximately 5% of Earth's current military capabilities, Admiral Richardson explained. The rest is distributed throughout the galaxy in positions that allow us to respond to threats against any protected population within 72 hours. Overlord's crystalline features reflected the light from the tactical display. You're threatening the entire galactic community. No, Overlord, we're offering you a choice, Admiral Richardson replied. You can continue operating according to principles that treat civilian populations as expendable, in which case you'll find yourselves in conflict with Earth. Or you can work with us to establish standards that protect vulnerable populations while respecting the sovereignty of individual governments. He leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious. But understand this, the choice is yours to make, but it's not yours to avoid. Earth has spent 3 centuries developing the capability to protect innocent populations throughout the galaxy. We will use that capability whether you cooperate with us or not. Ambassador Eth struggled to find words that could address the magnitude of what she was hearing. Admiral, what you're proposing would require fundamental changes to how galactic civilization has operated for. Yes, it would, Admiral Richardson agreed. And those changes are going to happen whether they occur through cooperation or through conflict. Earth strongly prefers cooperation, but we're prepared for either outcome. The Admiral manipulated his controls again, and the display shifted to show detailed documentation of human sanctuary operations. Worlds that had been transformed from barren rocks into thriving colonies, populations that had been saved from extinction and given the opportunity to rebuild their civilizations, technologies that had been shared to improve quality of life for billions of sentient beings. This is what Earth has been building for 3 centuries, he said. A network of protection and cooperation that spans the galaxy. We're offering every species the opportunity to be part of that network. And if we refuse? General N asked. Admiral Richardson's smile was calm, but carried an undertone that made it clear he was not making an empty threat. Then you'll find yourselves on the outside of a galactic community that has moved beyond the acceptance of genocide as a political tool. As the implications of the Admiral's words sank in, each representative began to understand that they were facing a choice that would define the future of galactic civilization. Humanity had spent centuries preparing for this moment, and they were now ready to implement changes that would affect every species in known space. The age of unchecked military power was ending, and the age of human protection was about to begin. No one returned after fighting humans, Part 5. 1 year had passed since Admiral Richardson's revelation at Harmony Point, and the galaxy had transformed in ways that few could have predicted. The changes had not come through conquest or subjugation, but through a careful application of pressure, incentive, and demonstration that had gradually shifted the balance of power throughout known space. In the redesigned chambers of the Galactic Council, now expanded to include representatives from dozens of species that had previously been considered extinct, Ambassador Sarah stood before the assembly to deliver the annual report on what had become known as the Sanctuary Protocol. The chambers themselves reflected the new reality of galactic politics, where once the seating had been arranged to emphasize the dominance of major military powers, the new configuration placed species representatives in a circular arrangement that emphasized equality and cooperation. The makers of harmonies sat alongside the Serpentine Consortium. The deep thinkers shared discussion platforms with the militant brotherhood. Former enemies now worked together on committees that addressed issues affecting multiple systems. Honored delegates, Ambassador began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who represented not just humanity, but the entire network of protected populations. I am pleased to report that the first year of the Sanctuary Protocol has exceeded our most optimistic projections. She activated the central holographic display, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy that illustrated the scope of the changes. Green indicators marked systems that had joined the Sanctuary network voluntarily. Blue markers showed refugee populations that had been successfully relocated and integrated into galactic society. Red indicators, thankfully few in number, marked systems that remained outside the new framework. 47 major governments have officially adopted Sanctuary Protocol standards, Ambassador continued. This represents approximately 73% of inhabited systems in known space. More importantly, we have documented a 92% reduction in conflicts involving civilian populations. The statistics were impressive, but they only told part of the story. The real transformation had occurred in the fundamental assumptions that governed interstellar relations. The casual acceptance of genocide and ethnic cleansing that had characterized galactic politics had been replaced by a framework that treated the protection of civilian populations as a basic requirement for participation in the galactic community. Representative of the Serpentine Consortium rose to address the assembly. A year earlier, her species had been among the most vocal opponents of human intervention. Now, she served as co-chair of the Refugee Integration Committee. Ambassador, the Serpentine Consortium would like to acknowledge the significant benefits we have gained through participation in the Sanctuary Protocol, she said, her scaled features reflecting genuine satisfaction. Our recent collaboration with deep thinker refugees on quantum computing research has advanced our technology by several decades. The cultural exchange programs have enriched our society in ways we had not anticipated. This was not an isolated example. Throughout the galaxy, species that had joined the Sanctuary network had discovered that cooperation with refugee populations brought benefits that far exceeded the costs of providing protection and resources. The makers of harmonies had revolutionized agricultural techniques for dozens of worlds. The Star Whisperers had shared communication technologies that enabled real-time translation between any known languages. The deep thinkers had contributed to breakthroughs in physics and engineering that were advancing galactic civilization at an unprecedented pace. But perhaps most significantly, the network effect of cooperation had begun to create solutions to problems that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. Resource conflicts that had traditionally led to warfare were now resolved through collaborative development projects. Territorial disputes were addressed through joint colonization initiatives that benefited all parties involved. Overlord of the Mineral Lords requested recognition to speak. Ambassador, the Mineral Lords have observed significant changes in galactic trade patterns since the implementation of the Sanctuary Protocol. Our analysis suggests that overall economic productivity has increased by approximately 30%. How do you explain this improvement? Ambassador smiled. Overlord, the answer is relatively simple. When populations are not expending resources on defending themselves against extinction, they can focus those resources on productive activities. When governments are not spending massive amounts on military forces designed for genocide operations, those resources become available for infrastructure, education, and technological development. She manipulated the display to show economic data that supported her statement. More importantly, the knowledge and skills preserved through the refugee protection programs represent centuries of accumulated wisdom that would have been lost forever. The economic value of that preserved knowledge is incalculable. The transformation had not been without its challenges. Several major powers had initially resisted the new framework, leading to confrontations that had tested the limits of human patience and capabilities. The hegemony had attempted to continue their traditional expansion policies by attacking a colony world inhabited by former deep thinker refugees. The response had been swift and decisive. Human forces had appeared throughout hegemony space simultaneously, disabling their entire fleet and occupying their government facilities within hours. The occupation had lasted exactly 1 week, during which time hegemony leadership had been given a comprehensive education in Sanctuary Protocol principles. When human forces, the hegemony had emerged as one of the most enthusiastic supporters of the new system. The Crystalline Empire had taken a different approach, attempting to develop countermeasures for human technology. Their research facilities had been infiltrated by human intelligence operatives who had demonstrated that their security systems were completely inadequate. Rather than sabotage the research, the humans had left detailed technical manuals showing how to improve the Empire's defensive capabilities. The gesture had been so unexpected and generous that the Empire had voluntarily joined the Sanctuary network without any further pressure. But it was the transformation of the collective that had perhaps been the most dramatic example of how the new system could work. Admiral, who had led the failed expedition to Sector 779, had requested a private meeting with Admiral Richardson 3 months after the encounter. Ambassador activated a recorded communication that had been made available to the full council with Admiral's permission. Admiral Richardson, the synthetic voice of the collective leader, said, "I have spent months analyzing the tactical and strategic implications of our encounter. I have reached a conclusion that I believe you anticipated." Admiral Richardson's voice responded with characteristic calm. "And what conclusion is that, Admiral?" "That the collective's traditional approach to expansion and control is obsolete," replied. "We have built our civilization on the assumption that military superiority is the ultimate arbiter of political disputes. Your forces demonstrated that our military capabilities are inadequate to enforce our will against a truly advanced opponent." There was a pause before continued. "But more importantly, I have observed the results of the Sanctuary Protocol in systems that have adopted your standards. The improvements in productivity, innovation, and social stability are significant. The collective has been operating according to principles that are not only morally questionable, but also strategically inefficient." The recording continued with Admiral requesting assistance in transforming collective society according to Sanctuary Protocol standards. Within 6 months, the most feared military force in known space had become one of the most effective protectors of refugee populations. The success of these transformations demonstrates a fundamental principle, Ambassador explained to the assembled delegates. Species that adopt cooperative rather than predatory approaches to interstellar relations discover that the benefits far exceed any perceived costs. She highlighted additional data showing technological advancement, economic growth, and social stability improvements in systems that had joined the Sanctuary network. But perhaps most importantly, we have observed the emergence of joint projects that address challenges facing the entire galactic community. The most significant of these projects was the Deep Space Exploration Initiative, a collaborative effort involving 37 species working together to investigate the outer reaches of the galaxy. The project had already made discoveries that were revolutionizing understanding of cosmology and physics, but its real importance was in demonstrating that former enemies could work together on projects that benefited all participants. Another major success was the Galactic Medical Exchange, which had virtually eliminated disease-related mortality among participating species. The sharing of medical knowledge and techniques had created treatments for conditions that had plagued various species. But it was the Cultural Preservation Project that perhaps best embodied the spirit of the new galactic community. Rather than allowing unique languages, art forms, and philosophical traditions to disappear when their originating species faced extinction, the project worked to preserve and share these cultural treasures with the broader galactic community. General N of the Militant Brotherhood requested recognition. A year earlier, he had been one of the most vocal opponents of human intervention. His transformation had been among the most dramatic in the galaxy. "Ambassador," he said, "the Militant Brotherhood wishes to announce our intention to establish the first integrated military academy in galactic history. We will be offering training in both traditional military tactics and Sanctuary Protocol peacekeeping techniques to officer candidates from all network species." This announcement generated surprised murmurs throughout the chamber. The Militant Brotherhood had traditionally been among the most isolationist species in known space, rarely cooperating with anyone on military matters. "We have discovered," General N continued, "that protecting civilian populations requires significantly more sophisticated tactical and strategic thinking than traditional conquest operations. The integration of multiple species' military doctrines and capabilities creates force multiplier effects that far exceed what any single species could achieve independently." The academy he described would bring together the best military minds from dozens of species to develop new approaches to peacekeeping, humanitarian intervention, and refugee protection. It represented a fundamental shift from military forces designed for conquest to military forces designed for protection. As the session continued, delegate after delegate rose to describe similar transformations within their societies. The ethereal collective had established refugee integration centers that were becoming models for successful cross-species cooperation. The Crystal Dominion had opened their most advanced research facilities to collaborative projects with refugee populations. The Empire had restructured their entire economic system to prioritize cooperation over competition. But perhaps the most significant change was in the fundamental assumptions that governed galactic civilization. The casual acceptance of genocide and ethnic cleansing that had characterized interstellar politics had been replaced by a recognition that diversity of species and cultures was a valuable resource that should be protected and preserved. Honored delegates, Ambassador said as the session drew to a close. 1 year ago, many of you viewed humanity as a threat to galactic stability. I hope that today's discussions have demonstrated that we see ourselves as partners in creating a galactic community that serves the interests of all its members. She paused, looking around the chamber at representatives of species that had once been bitter enemies and were now working together on projects that benefited the entire galaxy. The Sanctuary Protocol is not about human domination of galactic affairs, she continued. It is about creating a framework where every species can thrive without fear of extinction, where cooperation replaces conquest as the preferred method of achieving political objectives, and where the diversity of galactic civilization is seen as a strength rather than a threat. As the session concluded and delegates began to disperse, many lingered to continue discussions that had begun during the formal proceedings. These informal conversations were perhaps the best indicator of how fundamentally the galaxy had changed. Species that had not spoken to each other for centuries were now planning joint projects. Former enemies were sharing resources and knowledge. Ancient grudges were being set aside in favor of collaborative efforts that benefited all parties. The transformation was not complete, and there remained challenges to be addressed. A few systems continued to resist the new framework, and the integration of some refugee populations required ongoing support and assistance. But the fundamental shift had occurred. The galaxy had moved from a system based on the fear of extinction to one based on the hope of cooperation. In the secure facilities beneath Luna, Admiral Sarah reviewed reports from across the galaxy with satisfaction. The network her predecessors had spent centuries building was now operating openly, protecting populations that would have faced extinction and fostering cooperation between species that had traditionally viewed each other as enemies. The galaxy was still vast and full of challenges, but for the first time those challenges were being addressed through cooperation rather than conquest. The age of genocide as an acceptable political tool was ending, and the age of galactic cooperation was beginning. And in the darkness between the stars, human ships continued their ancient mission of watching, protecting, and ensuring that no one would ever again face extinction alone. No One Returned After Fighting Humans, Part 1. The Galactic Council chambers buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from across the known universe gathered for an emergency session. The massive crystalline structure that housed the council floated in the void between 3 stars, its transparent walls offering a breathtaking view of the cosmos that few bothered to appreciate today. Something had gone terribly wrong, and the implications sent ripples of fear through every species present. Admiral of the Empire stood at the center podium, his 6 arms trembling despite his attempts to maintain composure. His usually pristine blue exoskeleton bore scorch marks, and one of his secondary eyes had been replaced with a crude, cybernetic implant. The sight of the mighty military leader in such a state sent murmurs through the assembly. "Honored delegates," began, his voice carrying the weight of defeat, "I stand before you today to report on what can only be described as the most catastrophic military failure in recorded galactic history." Representative of the Serpentine Consortium hissed softly, her scaled head weaving with concern. "Admiral, your initial reports spoke of a routine subjugation mission. The target species had barely achieved faster-than-light travel. How could such primitives cause any significant damage?" His mandibles clicked nervously. "That is precisely what we believed, Honorda. The species calls themselves humans, and by all our intelligence reports, they should have fallen within standard. Their technology was centuries behind our own. Their space fleet consisted of crude, fusion-powered vessels that our sensors could barely classify as military craft. The massive form of Overlord shifted in his specially reinforced chair. The silicon-based mineral lords were known throughout the galaxy for their patience and strategic thinking, making obvious agitation all the more unsettling. "Get to the point, Admiral. What happened to the Third Fleet?" A holographic display materialized above the central podium, showing star charts and tactical readouts. Manipulated the controls with practiced efficiency, despite his obvious distress. The Third Fleet consisted of 350 vessels, including 12 dreadnoughts and our flagship, the inevitable Conquest. We approached their home system, which they call Sol, with standard invasion protocols. The hologram shifted to show a blue and green planet orbiting a yellow star. Their Earth appeared to be their only significantly populated planet, though they had established small colonies throughout their system. Initial scans suggested a population of approximately 8 billion humans. Standard doctrine called for a demonstration of power followed by demand for unconditional surrender. Counselor of the Ethereal Collective's energy form flickered with curiosity, and they refused. "Not exactly," replied, his voice growing quieter. "When we broadcast our standard surrender ultimatum, their response was unexpected. Instead of fear or defiance, they sent back what they termed a counter-proposal." The Admiral activated an audio file, and suddenly the chamber filled with a distinctly alien voice speaking in heavily accented galactic standard. The voice was rough, gravelly, and carried an undertone that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. "This is Admiral Sarah of the United Earth Defense Forces. We acknowledge your impressive fleet and your obvious technological superiority. However, we respectfully decline your offer of subjugation. Instead, we'd like to propose an alternative. You have 10 standard hours to withdraw from our system. After that time, any hostile vessels remaining will be treated as legitimate military targets. We recommend you take this opportunity to reconsider your position." Silence fell over the council chambers. Finally, Representative broke the quiet with a sound that might have been laughter if her species were capable of such expression. "They threatened you? A species that hasn't even mastered quantum computing threatened the Third Fleet." His expression grew grim. "We found their audacity amusing as well. Commander suggested we demonstrate our superiority by destroying one of their outer planets as an example. I authorized the attack on their fourth planet, which they called Mars." The holographic display showed a reddish planet with several small installations visible on its surface. "We directed a full bombardment from our primary weapons array. Enough firepower to crack a planet's crust and render it uninhabitable for." Overlord leaned forward, his crystalline features catching the light. "And the bombardment never reached the surface." His voice was barely above a whisper now. "Approximately 2 million kilometers from the planet, our energy beams simply stopped. They encountered some kind of field that absorbed or redirected every joule of energy we fired. The humans had surrounded their entire planet with this defensive barrier." Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the assembly. Such technology was theoretically possible, but required energy manipulation capabilities far beyond what any intelligence report had suggested the humans possessed. "That was when their ships moved," continued. "Not the crude fusion vessels our scouts had reported, but something entirely different. They appeared as if from nowhere, materializing in formations that surrounded our fleet in three-dimensional arrays that our understanding of physics." The hologram shifted to show sleek angular vessels that seemed to bend light around their hulls. Unlike the Baroque, ornate designs favored by most galactic civilizations, these ships were purely functional, every line serving a purpose. "How many vessels?" Counselor asked. "At first we counted 50, then 100, then 500. Our sensors kept detecting more as if they were phasing in and out of normal space." Manipulated the display, showing tactical readouts that made several delegates gasp in surprise. "But surely your fleet's superiority in numbers and firepower gave you the advantage," Representative interjected. His laugh was bitter and harsh. "We outnumbered them 7-1. Our individual vessels carried 3 times their firepower. By every tactical calculation, the battle should have been concluded within minutes." He paused, struggling to find words. "It was concluded within minutes. just not in the way we expected. The Admiral activated a new section of the holographic display, showing what appeared to be combat recordings. The assembled delegates watched in growing horror as the tactical situation unfolded. The humans did something no other species has ever attempted. Instead of engaging us ship to ship, they coordinated their entire fleet as a single entity. Every vessel moved in perfect synchronization, creating overlapping fields of fire that turned their numerical disadvantage into a tactical masterpiece. On the display, human ships moved through three-dimensional space with a precision that bordered on supernatural. Where vessels followed predictable attack patterns, the human ships seemed to anticipate every move, every strategy, every tactical decision before it was made. But that was not the worst part, continued, his voice growing even quieter. Their weapons were unlike anything in our databases. Instead of energy beams or projectile weapons, they used something they called probability manipulation. Overlord's massive form shifted again. Explain. They could alter the mathematical chance of specific events occurring. A weapon malfunction that had a 1 in 10 million probability would suddenly become inevitable. Navigation systems that had operated flawlessly for centuries would suddenly develop critical errors. Life support systems would fail in ways that every safety redundancy we had built. The tactical display showed ships beginning to malfunction seemingly at random. Dreadnoughts that had survived thousands of battles suddenly found their main weapons offline. Shields that had withstood the firepower of entire fleets simply stopped functioning. Within the first 10 minutes of engagement, we had lost 30% of our fleet not to enemy fire, but to our own systems turning against us, reported. And then they did something that still haunts my dreams. The Admiral's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They boarded us. Representative A's head snapped up. Impossible. Our security protocols prevent any unauthorized matter transmission. Our shields specifically guard against teleportation attacks. They did not teleport, replied. They simply walked through our hulls as if they were not there. Our sensors showed no breaches, no hull damage, no evidence of entry whatsoever. One moment our ships were secure, and the next, humans were standing in our corridors. The holographic display shifted to show internal security footage from various ships. The assembled delegates watched in fascination and terror as human figures seemed to materialize out of solid bulkheads, moving through the ships with purpose and efficiency that spoke of intimate knowledge of vessel design. They knew everything, continued. The location of every critical system, every command center, every escape pod. They moved through our ships as if they had designed them themselves, but they did not kill. This statement caused a stir among the delegates. Overlord spoke for many when he asked, "They took prisoners." No, replied. They simply disabled our weapons and life support systems with surgical precision, then left. Every crew member was left alive and unharmed, but every ship was rendered completely inoperable. The Admiral manipulated the controls again, showing the aftermath of the battle. Hundreds of vessels drifted helplessly in space, their crews alive but their ships reduced to little more than elaborate life rafts. The entire engagement lasted exactly 17 minutes and 34 seconds, reported. In that time, the Third Fleet, the most powerful military force in history, was rendered completely combat ineffective without the loss of a single human vessel or the death of a single crew member. Counselor's energy form pulsed with confusion. Why would they spare your forces? By galactic convention, you would have been within your rights to expect no quarter in such an engagement. His mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. That is when Admiral contacted us again. The entire human fleet had arranged itself around our disabled vessels, and she transmitted to every ship simultaneously. Another audio file activated, and once again the gravelly human voice filled the chamber. Admiral, this is Admiral. Your fleet is disabled, but your crews are safe. You have two choices. You can remain here while we arrange for rescue vessels from your government, or you can accept our assistance in repairing your ships enough to return home. Either way, you have our guarantee of safe passage out of our system. The recording continued. However, I need you to understand something very important. You came to our home to conquer us. You attempted to destroy one of our planets. By the laws of civilized warfare, we would be justified in treating your entire fleet as prisoners of war. Instead, we're offering you mercy. The human admiral's voice grew harder, carrying an edge that made several delegates unconsciously step back from the holographic display. Tell your government, and tell anyone else who might be listening to this transmission, that Earth is under our protection. We don't seek conflict, but we will not tolerate aggression against our species or our worlds. Anyone who comes here with hostile intent will find themselves facing capabilities they cannot comprehend and strategies they cannot counter. The recording ended, leaving the council chamber in absolute silence. Representative A was the first to speak. What did you do? We accepted their offer of assistance, replied without shame. Within 6 hours, human engineering teams had repaired our ships enough for faster-than-light travel. They provided us with detailed star charts showing the safest routes back to space. They even supplied emergency rations and medical supplies for crew members who had been injured during the battle. He paused, his expression growing even more troubled. But before we left, Admiral requested a private communication with me. What she told me is why I requested this emergency session of the Galactic Council. Overlord's patience was clearly wearing thin. And what did she tell you, Admiral? Straightened, drawing himself up to his full height. She informed me that Earth has been aware of the galactic community for over 2 centuries. They have been observing us, studying our technologies, our tactics, our social structures, and our military capabilities. The primitive space fleet our scouts reported was a deception designed to make us underestimate them. The implications of this statement sent shockwaves through the assembly. If the humans had been studying galactic civilization for 200 years without revealing themselves, it suggested intelligence and counterintelligence capabilities that dwarfed anything currently known. She also informed me that Earth has been in discreet contact with several species that the galactic community believes to be extinct, continued. The humans have been providing them with sanctuary and assistance while allowing the rest of the galaxy to believe they were destroyed in various conflicts. Counselor's energy form flickered rapidly. Which species? The makers of harmonies, destroyed in the Crystal Wars 3 centuries ago. The deep thinkers, eliminated during the Purification Campaign. The Star Whisperers, casualties of the Great Plague that swept the Outer Rim. Each name on the list caused visible reactions among the delegates, as many of these species had been personally responsible for their destruction. Admiral made it very clear that Earth considers itself the protector of these refugee populations, continued. She stated that any attempt to verify their location or threaten them would be treated as an act of war against humanity. The Admiral activated one final section of the holographic display, showing long-range sensor data that made several delegates gasp in shock. Before we left Sol System, our sensors detected massive construction projects in the outer regions, shipyards that could produce vessels on a scale that dwarfs anything we have ever conceived, defensive installations that appear to manipulate gravity itself, and energy signatures that suggest the humans have mastered technologies that we are only beginning to theorize about. He looked around the chamber, meeting the gaze of every delegate present. Honored representatives, I stand before you today to deliver a warning. Humanity is not the primitive species we believed them to be. They are a civilization that has been preparing for contact with us for centuries, and they have capabilities that exceed our own in ways we are only beginning to understand. His voice grew stronger as he reached his conclusion. More importantly, they have made it clear that they will defend themselves and their allies with ruthless efficiency. The Third Fleet was not defeated. It was allowed to survive as a message. Admiral wanted us to return home with proof of their capabilities and their intentions. The Admiral stepped back from the central podium, his message delivered. I recommend that this council authorize no further military action against Earth or any system under human protection until we have a much better understanding of what we are dealing with. The humans have extended an offer of peaceful coexistence, but they have also demonstrated that they are fully prepared for war. As took his seat, the council chamber erupted in heated discussions among the various species representatives. Some called for immediate military action to eliminate the human threat before it could grow stronger. Others argued for caution and diplomatic contact. A few suggested that the humans might prove valuable allies against common enemies. But in the back of every delegate's mind was the same troubling thought. If humanity could defeat the Third Fleet so easily while holding back their true capabilities, what else were they hiding in the darkness between the stars? The emergency session would continue for 3 standard days. But the real question was not what the Galactic Council would decide. The real question was whether it would matter at all to the humans who had just announced their presence in the galaxy with a demonstration of power that left no room for misunderstanding.